Mafia boss noticed a single mom waitress hiding bruises. That night her abuser disappeared. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sarah Mitchell was a woman who lived a life of survival. A single mom working long hours as a waitress in a high-end restaurant, just trying to make ends meet for her 6-year-old son. Every day, she served wealthy patrons with a smile, even though her heart felt heavy. Beneath her uniform, Sarah wore the scars of her past, physical reminders of a life she could never escape. Each bruise, each mark was a silent story she kept hidden from the world. But Sarah wasn't just hiding bruises from her abuser. She was hiding the fact that she had given up on the possibility of ever escaping him. Her life had become a routine of fear, exhaustion, and small victories of silence. Then, one evening, as she carried a tray of drinks through the upscale restaurant, Sarah felt a pair of eyes on her. They weren't just any eyes. There was something in them, a knowing gaze that saw past her facade. Dominic Marino was a man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His presence was magnetic, and his dark eyes never missed a thing. He wasn't just another well-dressed man in the crowd. He was someone whose reputation preceded him. A mafia boss with a reputation for getting what he wanted and making people disappear when they crossed him. Sarah didn't know it yet, but she had caught his attention in the most unexpected way. As she moved between tables, serving drinks and keeping her head low, Dominic watched her from across the room. He noticed the way she carefully adjusted her sleeve to cover a bruise, the way she flinched when someone touched her arm, the way she seemed constantly on edge. Something in his gut told him there was more to this woman than the perfect smile she showed to the world. That night, as Sarah passed by his table, Dominic's gaze locked onto her. She stumbled slightly, dropping a tray of glasses, and as she bent down to pick up the pieces, he saw it, clear as day. Her wrist, marked with the unmistakable fingerprints of someone who had hurt her. Dominic didn't speak immediately. He let the moment hang in the air, watching as Sarah hurriedly covered up the bruise, flustered by the attention. But he wasn't one to ignore things, not when they piqued his interest. He stood up, his towering figure moving towards her. Sarah's heart raced, her instincts telling her to run, but she froze. "Who did that to you?" His voice was calm, but there was an intensity in it that made her skin prickle. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to lie, to say it was nothing, but the truth was already written in her eyes. She stammered, but before she could say anything, Dominic added, "It's okay. You don't have to tell me now, but I'll be watching." His words hung in the air, leaving Sarah with a sense of unease, but also an odd comfort. For the first time in a long while, someone had seen her. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of Dominic's gaze on her, and as the evening went on, his presence lingered in her thoughts. She had never met someone like him before. Most of the wealthy patrons she served were oblivious to her struggles, their lives far removed from hers. But Dominic, despite his cold and imposing exterior, had seen through her facade. It was as if he had sensed the weight she carried, the invisible scars that shaped her every day. When she finally finished her shift, Sarah hurried out of the restaurant, eager to put the night behind her. The streets of Manhattan were alive with lights and sounds, but to Sarah, everything felt distant. Her tired legs carried her through the busy city, each step heavier than the last. Her mind kept replaying the brief encounter with Dominic, and the question he had asked her, "Who did that to you?" The words echoed in her head. She knew she couldn't escape the past forever, but for the first time in years, she wondered if someone might be able to help her. But, as much as she wanted to believe that, she was also scared. Scared of what would happen if she let someone in, scared of the consequences. She had lived her life in silence, trying to protect her son from the darkness that had clouded her own world. She couldn't let him see the pain, the fear. He deserved better. Sarah reached her apartment, the familiar walls offering little comfort. Her son, Ethan, was already asleep, his small figure curled up on the couch. She sighed, gently brushing his hair from his face before she settled into her own bed. Sleep came slowly, as it always did, but that night was different. There was a strange sense of peace that crept into her mind, a feeling that, perhaps, things might change. The next day, Sarah went about her routine as usual, her body on autopilot as she cleaned tables and served drinks. But Dominic's words lingered in her thoughts, and the more she tried to push them away, the stronger they became. He had seen her. He had noticed her. And she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be seen, truly seen, without fear or shame. As the evening shifted into night, Dominic walked into the restaurant again. This time, his eyes found Sarah before she even saw him. She felt his presence like a weight on her chest, his gaze following her every move. But instead of feeling anxious, she felt something else. It was as though, for the first time, she was no longer invisible. When their eyes met, there was no judgment, no pity, only understanding. As Sarah moved to serve his table, Dominic made sure to catch her attention. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" His words weren't a request, they were a statement. Sarah froze. She had never expected this, never thought that someone like Dominic would approach her. But something in his tone made it clear that this wasn't a simple conversation. It was a demand, and in that moment, she realized she had no choice but to follow him. With a nervous glance around the restaurant, Sarah made her way to where Dominic stood, his figure towering over her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. Dominic regarded her. For a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I know what you're going through," he said, his voice softer now. "And I can help you. But you have to trust me." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Trust him? The man who had barely spoken a few words to her? But there was something in his eyes, something that made her want to believe him, something that made her want to trust him. But she couldn't let herself. Not again. "I don't need your help," she replied quickly, trying to push back the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I can handle things on my own." Dominic shook his head, his expression unchanged. "You don't have to do it alone," he said quietly. "Let me help you." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was strong enough to handle everything by herself. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of carrying the weight of her life alone. And for the first time in a long while, she considered the possibility of accepting help. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his voice low and reassuring. "You don't have to trust me yet," he said. "But I'm here when you're ready." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the middle of the restaurant, her heart racing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The days after Dominic's offer were a blur for Sarah. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her, the way his words had hung in the air like a promise she wasn't ready to accept. She hadn't asked for his help, but in some corner of her mind, she wondered if she had just missed an opportunity to change everything. The next few shifts at the restaurant were filled with the usual routine, serving drinks, making small talk with customers, and trying her best to ignore the painful truth that weighed on her shoulders. Ethan needed her to be strong. He depended on her. She couldn't let him see her as weak. But with every passing day, the bruises on her arms seemed to burn deeper. Dominic didn't come back to the restaurant for several days, but when he didn't just walk in as another guest. He arrived with a sense of purpose, and this time, he wasn't just observing. As soon as Sarah saw him, her stomach knotted. There he was, standing by the entrance, surrounded by his usual entourage. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Dominic's eyes immediately found hers, and he gave her a small nod. This time, he wasn't going to wait for her to approach. He walked straight towards her, and before she could react, he said, "Sarah, let's talk." There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "I'm working," Sarah replied, trying to maintain some sense of control. She wasn't sure why, but she didn't want to appear vulnerable in front of him, especially not now. "I know," Dominic said with a knowing smile, "but this won't take long. Let's go outside for a minute." Sarah hesitated. She wanted to say no, to push him away, but something in his eyes told her that he wasn't going to back down. She glanced around, noticing the curious looks from her coworkers. She could feel their eyes on her, but none of them seemed willing to intervene. Finally, she gave in, nodding slightly. Dominic led her outside, into the cool night air. The streets of Manhattan were quieter now, the usual bustle replaced by a calm, almost eerie stillness. As they walked a few steps away from the restaurant, Dominic stopped, turning to face her. "You don't have to do this alone, Sarah," he said, his voice softer now, more reassuring. Sarah crossed her arms, trying to keep her distance, but the truth in his words made her uneasy. "I don't know what you want from me," she replied. "You don't even know me." Dominic looked at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like he could see right through her. "I don't need to know everything about you," he said. "I just know you're carrying something heavy, and I can help you with that. But only if you let me." Sarah swallowed hard. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she could handle everything on her own. She didn't need anyone's help. She had always been the one to take care of things, to make sure Ethan was safe and provided for. But the truth was, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the act. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer, his expression softening. "You don't have to trust me yet," he replied. "But I'm offering you a way out. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a long moment, Sarah stood there, her heart racing in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to reach out and accept his help, but something held her back. She had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile thing, and she wasn't ready to hand it over to someone like Dominic. "I can't just leave everything behind," she said, shaking her head. "I can't just forget everything that's happened." Dominic's gaze softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw something other than the cold, calculating man she had imagined him to be. There was genuine concern in his eyes. "You don't have to forget," he said quietly, "but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Sarah stood there, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to do, but as she looked at Dominic, she felt a small flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to finally let someone else take the weight, just for a moment. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice uncertain. Dominic nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I'll be here when you're ready." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the quiet streets, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might have a choice. Days passed after Sarah's conversation with Dominic, and the tension in her chest only seemed to grow. She couldn't shake the memory of his words, his presence. It felt like her life had been turned upside down in an instant. Every day, she went through the motions, work, home, taking care of Ethan, but her mind constantly drifted back to Dominic. She kept telling herself that it was too risky, too complicated. She couldn't let herself get involved in that world, no matter how tempting it seemed. Her life was already complicated enough. Yet, as she moved through her day, there was a part of her that knew something had to change. She couldn't keep living in fear, hiding behind the walls she had built around herself. She was tired of pretending everything was fine. One evening, after a long shift at the restaurant, Sarah walked to her car, exhausted but with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a while. As she reached the parking lot, she saw him. Dominic stood near his car, leaning casually against it, watching her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her defenses. It was as if he had been waiting for her. She froze for a moment, her heart racing. She wanted to turn away, walk back inside the restaurant, but she couldn't. Something about his presence drew her in, made her feel like she had no choice but to confront whatever was between them. "Sarah," Dominic said as she approached. His voice was calm, yet there was an underlying urgency in it. "We need to talk." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, too tired to resist. "What is it, Dominic?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. Dominic pushed himself off the car and took a step closer. "I know you've been thinking about what I said," he said, "and I'm not here to pressure you, but I want you to know something. I'm serious about helping you." Sarah looked up at him, feeling a wave of emotion rush over her. She had wanted to push him away, to tell him she didn't need his help, but now, in this moment, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened, and he stepped even closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to trust me completely, but I can't stand by and watch you struggle when I know I can do something about it." Sarah looked down at the ground, unsure of what to say. Her heart was telling her one thing, but her head was telling her another. She didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't want to rely on someone else. But the truth was, she had been struggling for so long, and she was tired. Tired of carrying everything on her own. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. I don't know how to let someone in. Dominic reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm but comforting, and for a moment, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. You don't have to do it alone anymore, he said. You have a choice now. You can keep fighting on your own, or you can let me help you. But the decision is yours. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. She looked up at Dominic, his intense gaze never leaving her. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. Take all the time you need, he replied. But remember, I'm here when you're ready. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the parking lot, her heart still pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The days following her conversation with Dominic felt heavy for Sarah, and the uncertainty in her heart seemed to grow. Every time she walked into the restaurant or sat at home, her mind wandered back to the moment outside the parking lot. Dominic's words echoed in her head. Asterisk, you don't have to do it alone anymore. Asterisk, he had given her a choice, a way out from the life she had been trapped in for so long. But with the possibility of something new came fear. The fear of change, of letting someone in, of needing someone. She had spent years convincing herself that she could do everything on her own, but the weight of the bruises on her soul felt too much to carry alone any longer. Ethan needed her to be strong, and she couldn't let him see the cracks in her armor. She was determined to protect him, to create a life for him where he didn't have to witness the pain she had endured. But she also knew that she couldn't keep pretending forever. That night, after her shift, Sarah stood outside the restaurant, staring up at the city lights. The weight of the decision before her seemed almost unbearable. She didn't know if she was ready, but deep down, she knew she couldn't keep living like this. She needed to take a chance. As she walked toward her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Dominic. Asterisk, if you're ready, I'll be at the usual spot. Take your time, but don't wait too long. Asterisk, the words were simple, but there was an understanding in them, a promise that he wouldn't push her, but he wouldn't let her go either. Sarah's heart beat faster as she read the message. The part of her that had been so afraid to let someone in now felt an unfamiliar warmth. She wasn't alone. Dominic had given her the choice, and now it was time to make it. She typed out a quick response. Asterisk, I'm on my way. Asterisk, the drive to the location Dominic had mentioned felt like the longest of her life. The streets of Manhattan blurred past her, the headlights from other cars casting long shadows on the pavement. As she neared the meeting spot, her nerves tightened. This was it. She was about to step into something unknown, something that could change everything. When she arrived, Dominic's black car was parked nearby. He was standing next to it, his dark figure outlined against the city lights. He turned when he heard her car pull up, and his expression softened as he saw her. Sarah, he said, his voice calm, but full of something deeper. You came. She nodded, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. I'm ready, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic stepped toward her, his presence towering but reassuring. You don't have to explain anything. I just want to help, he said. For the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel like she had to carry the world on her shoulders alone. Dominic wasn't offering her a quick fix. He wasn't offering false promises. What he was offering was a chance at something better. A chance at freedom. Thank you, she whispered, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't just a polite thank you. It was a thank you that came from a place deep inside her, from the part of her that still believed in the possibility of change. You're not alone anymore, Dominic said gently, his hand briefly touching her arm in a gesture of comfort. Sarah felt a shiver run through her, but it wasn't fear. It was the first step toward something different. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, she felt like it was a path worth taking. The following days felt like a whirlwind for Sarah. as she walked alongside Dominic. Her emotions swirled in a mix of confusion, relief, and uncertainty. She had made the choice to accept his help, but the journey ahead seemed daunting. Every step she took with him, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but the fear of what might come still lingered. They spent the next few days talking, getting to know each other in a way Sarah had never imagined. Dominic was unlike anyone she had ever met. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man with a deep understanding of power and control, yet there was something about him that made her feel safe. She had never imagined that someone like him would care about someone like her. His offer of protection wasn't just a promise of safety from the physical dangers in her life. It was a promise to help her find her strength again, to reclaim the life she had lost. But even as they spoke, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. One afternoon, after a long shift at the restaurant, Dominic took her to a quiet cafe, a place far from the chaos of the city. The calm atmosphere was a stark contrast to the tension Sarah had been living with for so long. As they sat at a small table in the corner, Dominic leaned forward, his eyes intense but gentle. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and steady, "I want you to know that I'm not asking for anything in return. You don't owe me anything. I'm here because I want to help you, because I see something in you that you might have forgotten." Sarah looked down at her coffee, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup as she processed his words. "I don't know if I can ever be who I was before," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't even know who that person was anymore." Dominic reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "You don't have to figure it out by yourself. I'll help you find that person again, one step at a time." Sarah swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She had always been the one to carry the weight, to keep everything together, but now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't have to. She could let someone in, let someone help her, and the idea was both terrifying and freeing. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face everything that's happened." Dominic's grip on her hand tightened slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere. We'll face it together." The words washed over her, bringing with them a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Dominic wasn't asking her to be perfect. He wasn't asking her to have everything figured out. He was just asking her to trust him, to let him be there for her in a way no one ever had. And for the first time in so long, Sarah felt like it might be okay to trust again. Over the next few weeks, Dominic and Sarah began to build a connection that went beyond the surface. Dominic respected her boundaries, never pushing her too hard, but always there when she needed him. They talked about her past, about the pain she had carried for so long, and for the first time, Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone else. She shared the small details, the things that hurt the most, her fears, her regrets, the way she had tried to protect Ethan from everything. Dominic listened with a quiet understanding, never rushing her, never making her feel like she had to explain herself. He was patient, kind, and it was a kindness she had never experienced before. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of Dominic's building, looking out over the city, Sarah finally felt like she could breathe. The weight of her past was still there, but it no longer felt so suffocating. She had taken the first step toward healing, and that step had led her to a place where she could imagine a future beyond the pain. "I don't know what the future holds," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But for the first time, I think I can face it." Dominic smiled, his eyes warm. "Whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone." Sarah leaned back, staring up at the stars, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope, and it was a hope that she hadn't known she had until Dominic had shown her it was possible. The weeks that followed were filled with small, incremental steps that Sarah had never thought possible. She found herself trusting Dominic more each day, but it wasn't just his words that made her feel safe. It was his actions. He was patient with her, never pushing her to do more than she was ready for. Sarah had never felt this kind of calm before. Every interaction with him made her feel as though the world, in all its chaos, could still offer moments of peace. Dominic's world was a far cry from the quiet, mundane life Sarah had known. He had his own set of rules, his own understanding of loyalty and strength, and as he allowed her into his world, She began to see how deeply connected he was to the people he cared about. One evening, as they sat in the small cafe they frequented, Sarah found herself opening up about more than she ever thought she would. The weight of her past seemed a little less heavy as she shared pieces of herself she had hidden for years. "I used to think I had to keep everything to myself," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "But now, I'm starting to realize that maybe I don't." Dominic, who had been quietly listening, met her gaze. His eyes were steady, calm, giving her the space she needed to speak without feeling judged. "It's okay to let go sometimes," he said softly. "You don't have to carry it all alone." For a moment, Sarah felt vulnerable, but in a way that wasn't frightening. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to shield herself from the world. She didn't have to be the strong, unshakable person that life had forced her to become. With Dominic, she could be someone else, someone softer, someone who could breathe again. After that night, Sarah's relationship with Dominic grew deeper. They spent more time together, each moment filled with understanding and patience. But Sarah was also careful. She couldn't let herself forget the past. There were still things she hadn't shared, fears she hadn't voiced. One night, as they were walking back to Dominic's car after a quiet dinner, he stopped and turned to her. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "there's something you need to know. I'm not just here for you because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because I care about you." His words struck her like a wave, unexpected but welcome. Sarah swallowed hard, her emotions catching in her throat. She had been running from the idea of needing someone, but now, standing before him, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of needing him, of allowing herself to trust him. "I care about you too," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the night air. Dominic's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw a side of him she hadn't expected, vulnerable, genuine. "Then let me help you," he said. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." She nodded slowly, her heart racing. There was so much she didn't know, so much she was still afraid to confront. But for the first time, she felt like she had a choice. She could let someone in. She could accept help. As they stood there, in the dim glow of the streetlights, Sarah realized that this was her turning point. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would take her, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to walk it. She wasn't alone anymore, and that thought, though terrifying, also brought a sense of peace. Dominic didn't push her any further. He simply offered his presence, a steady hand, and a promise that things could be different. Sarah didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that, with Dominic by her side, she could face whatever came next. She had made it this far, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that things might actually get better. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah began to feel a shift inside her. With Dominic's steady presence, she found herself peeling back layers of fear she had carried for so long. The quiet moments they shared, walking down the street, sitting together at the cafe, even just being in each other's company, became a balm for wounds she hadn't realized were still raw. She was learning how to trust again, but more importantly, she was learning how to trust herself. Dominic never rushed her, never pressured her to open up. He simply listened, offering support without expecting anything in return. Every word he spoke, every quiet gesture, slowly chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. Sarah still had moments of doubt, of course. She would catch herself questioning whether she was making the right decision, whether trusting Dominic was the right thing to do. But those doubts were becoming quieter. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the city, Sarah and Dominic sat on the rooftop of his building. The city sprawled out below them. She looked at him, her heart beating a little faster as she realized how much he had become a part of her life. "I don't know where this is going," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Dominic turned to her, his expression soft, but there was a spark in his eyes that made her feel understood. "You don't have to have it all figured out, Sarah," he said, his voice calm. "You don't have to know everything right now. Just take it one day at a time. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here." She nodded, her chest tight as she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she needed to believe that everything didn't have to be perfect. She had spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to make everything fit into a neat little box. But the truth was, life didn't work that way. And for the first time, she felt okay with not having all the answers. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the words heavy with meaning. Dominic didn't reply right away, but his smile was enough. It was enough to remind her that, despite everything, she wasn't alone. The next few days felt lighter for Sarah. She didn't feel as burdened by the weight of her past. She still had a long road ahead, but with each step, she felt more grounded, more confident. She began to see glimpses of the woman she used to be, the woman who wasn't defined by pain or fear. Dominic continued to be a steady presence in her life, and slowly, Sarah started to allow herself to imagine a future that wasn't so weighed down by the mistakes and regrets of the past. One afternoon, as Sarah walked into the restaurant for another shift, she noticed a small bouquet of flowers sitting on her table. It was a simple gesture, but it made her heart flutter. There was no note, just the flowers, a quiet reminder that someone cared. Dominic had done this before, sending small gifts with no explanation, just because. He never expected anything in return, never asked for anything. It was just his way of showing her that she was important, that she mattered. Sarah smiled to herself as she picked up the flowers, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had never felt this kind of care before, and she realized how much she had taken it for granted. It wasn't about grand gestures or words. It was about consistency, about showing up even when it wasn't easy. That night, as Sarah walked home, the flowers still in her hand, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The city felt less overwhelming, less intimidating. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As time passed, Sarah's life began to take on a new rhythm. She still worked at the restaurant, but the weight she had carried for so long was no longer there. She felt lighter, freer, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Dominic's presence in her life had brought something she never thought possible: peace. He didn't try to fix her, didn't try to change who she was. He simply allowed her to be herself, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe without fear. One afternoon, as Sarah walked home from work, she found herself smiling for no reason at all. The world didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. The city, once a place full of noise and chaos, now felt a little quieter, a little kinder. She had Dominic to thank for that, but more importantly, she had herself to thank. She had allowed herself to heal, to move forward. She had taken the first step in letting go of the past, and that was no small victory. That evening, as Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, Ethan walked into the room, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, guess what?" he asked, barely able to contain his enthusiasm. "I got an A on my math test." Sarah's heart swelled with pride as she looked at her son. He had always been her reason for everything, the reason she kept going even when things felt impossible. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've been working so hard, and it's paying off." Ethan grinned, his eyes lighting up. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." As Sarah looked at him, she realized that he had been the one constant in her life, the one thing she had always fought for. And now, as she watched him grow and thrive, she realized that she could finally breathe easy knowing she had given him the life he deserved. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat on the couch, reflecting on everything that had changed. She thought about Dominic and the way he had entered her life, not as a savior, but as a person who cared, who showed up when she needed it the most. She didn't need him to fix her, she had done that herself. But his presence had given her the strength to believe in herself again. She felt a sense of gratitude wash over her as she thought about all the small moments that had led her to this point. The gentle conversations with Dominic, the quiet support he had offered, the patience he had shown. She had learned that strength didn't come from doing everything on her own. Sometimes, it came from allowing others to help, from accepting that you didn't have to carry everything alone. The next day, as Sarah and Dominic sat together in the park, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the grass, she looked at him with a new understanding. She had finally let herself trust someone again, and for the first time, it felt right. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of sincerity. "For everything. For being here, for letting me be myself." Dominic smiled, his gaze warm and steady. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah," he said. "I'm just glad I could be a part of your journey." As they sat together in the quiet park, the world around them felt still, and for a moment, Sarah felt at peace. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. With Dominic by her side, and Ethan's love to guide her, she knew she was stronger than she had ever been. Life was still uncertain, but now, she felt equipped to handle whatever came next. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And that, in itself, was enough.